Hello, hobby friends. Today, we're going to do some kitbashing. Specifically, for my Marienburg warband for Mordheim, I need a couple of spearmen. They're cheap, and they strike first in combat. For the bodies, I'm using the Empire Militia pack. This is an old pack that was around back when Warhammer Fantasy was out, and has now been re-released under Empire Old World. It was also the basis for the warriors that you got in the original Mordheim box set. Now you may know there's no spears in that set, and while you can get them from the State Trooper set, I wanted to make them myself. For spearman number 1, I grabbed the blunderbuss arms, cut off the blunderbuss, making sure it was nice and flat and as close to the hands as I possibly could, then drilled out the middle, making a hole with larger and larger bits progressively on my pin vise. And then I got a nice suitably oversized headed spear from an old skeleton horde kit, cut it close to the hands and withered it down a bit and made it slide in just perfect. Using some sprue glue and then Tamiya extra thin cement, I made sure it lined up nice and straight. For the left hand, I simply used an open hand position from one of the other arms. I snipped it off nice and tight and stuck it onto the left-handed side of the blunderbuss arm. For spearman number 2, I simply grabbed the halberd arm. I snipped off the big axe head on the halberd and made it a spear with a little bit of a pointy hook. To make all these arms fit in ways that they weren't originally intended, I'm just using some sprue glue and some Tamiya extra thin cement. This means that you can pose the arms and have a lot more working time than you would do with just simply filing it down and then supergluing it into position. For the bases, simply some cardboard bits that are cut roughly into cobble shapes. Here I'm just adjusting them a bit to make them a bit more realistic. And then spray painted. Some good old Chaos Black and some grey Sear Zenithal over the top, and I'm into painting. I use pale sand everywhere where I'm going to apply contrast paint or it's going to be a nice linen colour at the end. I then start doing my colourful base coats. I use, for example, in the purples, a Vallejo Royal Purple, then an Alien Purple, then a Squid Ink Pink, I think it's called. And I'll just do one thin layer of each, because as I progress through the colours, it works well. I then do the same for the teal blues. To highlight, I'm using a patting motion with a flat brush generally, and I find that works best, covers quickly, and reduces streak marks. For the contrast, I'm using Garagax Sewer for wood and for hair, using snakebite leather for their leather breeches and straps, etc., and then Guilliman flesh tone on the skin. For the metal, I'm using Vallejo Aluminium Air Paint, mixed with some Liquitex inks, in this case burnt umber and carbon black, and that gives an equivalent kind of like lead belcher, but it's nice and smooth and goes on beautifully. When using inks mixed into metallics, you need to make sure that you mix frequently to keep it all in suspension, or I find it tends to separate. I also then highlight the Guilliman flesh tone with a mix of pale sand and Guilliman flesh tone. Just dab on the highlights there, makes it a bit more opaque. It's a great tip I got from Sonic Sledgehammer there. And then I put a wash over the two bright base colours, that being Celestian Blue and Druchii Violet. I find this brings the different grades all together, all the highlights that I did. As you can see, I'm still mostly using the flat brush, just patting on the highlights, nice and simple, nice and easy. Now you must always remember to use brush soap. I use this tin of Chronicles brush soap that I picked up at Heretics Haven there in Nambour on a visit. You simply wash your brush off, rub it in nice and tight onto the tin and get all the bristles agitated and removing all the pigment. I then rinse it off again and then gently draw the brush across the top, and it brings all the bristles back to shape and they kind of like reset for that extra snap when you go to use them again. For the bases, I start off with some rust grey and I think some Munitorum grey as well, and I just dry brush that across the top. I then add some pale sand and work up the highlights, nice and easy, nice and simple. Don't worry if it looks too grey though, because it's all going to get a wash later on. Now for jobs like this coming up, gluing on tufts of grass, I think it's the place where the Gorilla Glue Superglue pen really comes into its own. As you can see, I'm just putting little dibs and dabs here and there, very precise, no glue running anywhere. Then with my hobby tweezers, grabbing some of the grass and just placing them right where the glue is. Easy, no fuss, you can't muck it up, you just get it done. And for my 2 warriors, simply a nice good blob of glue, either as foot, stick it down, and then add some good old baking soda. You might see the baking soda and be a bit concerned, but when you wash the model, that'll be all absorbed and it'll just look like dust at their feet. And at this time, I decided to magnetize the bases as well. I got out my scratch pens, scuffed at the base, and a nice dab of super glue, put the magnet on, and again, some more baking soda to add a bit of strength. If you want to know where you can get those scratch brushes, I picked them up at Frontline Hobbies there in Newcastle, and they've been a great tool. Now for the wash, I simply mixed some Agrax Earthshade 50-50 with some Lamia Medium. I covered the whole model from top to bottom, including the base and importantly, the grass. You must always put a wash or something to darken down the grass. It'll make it fit into the environment much better. I then cleaned my brush, dipping it off in water, and then went back over the model, pulling away excess and making sure that while the creases all had wash in it, that nothing had built up there. What you really don't want is an excess spot of wash that'll then look all shiny and look a bit off. Now for my favourite thing about wet palettes. After you've done your wash, you still have your colours sitting there and they've all thinned out nicely. I can pick them up with my flat brush and just pat them on in a thin glaze highlight on those colours and bring them right back up. It means you're not wasting paint and they are the exact colour you need. It's great. Now please, if anybody knows about cameras, comment below what kind of lens should I be looking at for this sort of work to help me keep on focus. For a final flourish, I applied some dirty down moss effect, painted the rims black, and then matte varnished them with Vallejo matte acrylic varnish. So here they are, Hugo and Pascal. Let me know what you think down below, and please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more.